going through all the material to tell Pat Tillman's story. By the time you got there, was that material already on the table from Danny's researches, or were you going and digging up more in the process of making this film?
We did benefit. There was a kind of a, we benefited greatly from Danny. What we found on our own was a lot of the archival material, news stuff that obviously it had been seen before, but putting it in this totally different context was almost like finding things anew, like that, Jessica Lange moment and things like that, So similarly with her documents, with that box of documents, you could actually download from a site, a military site, you could download a PDF of all 3,500 pages. It was still redacted, but even the stuff that you could find in there was absolutely shocking to read and realize that nobody had reported on it, that anybody could have downloaded it. So that was a funny feeling of like, God, why isn't anybody doing any real journalism on it?
Is there a couple things like that you just really, a question you really wanted to ask, or something you wanted to ask it to?
Well, sure, we would have loved to have spoken with the shooters, but they obviously, for obvious reasons, didn't want to speak to us, and we got one or two of them on the phone, and they actually, I think they literally laughed at us when we proposed it to them.
The story being raised again, did anything come of that, or what was the effect of that, both for Tillman's family and for other people around the story?
Well, it's a really interesting point, and I've been ruminating on that, kind of being on the tail end of the process. Just showed it at West Point, and afterwards, Molly Thompson, who may be here, but oh, hi, Molly. Hi. So this is a good example of that. Molly and I went up there. It was a really moving screening, and the Q&A was really interesting because all the cadets addressed you as sir when they ask you a question, and it was bizarre, and then the guy came up to me afterwards who said, I am kind of involved in this story in a way. I worked for Pete Guerin at the time. That's the Secretary of the Army you see in the who does the press conference, and he said, and then he offered me a compliment. He said, I thought you did a wonderful job, getting to the family's perspective, and I, just being kind of dense, I guess, I went, we were driving home, and I said to Molly, well, that was interesting, right? That guy who worked for Pete Guerin, who, felt the film was valid or whatever, and she said, nah, that was an underhanded compliment. She kind of, sitting next to us, parsed apart what he had said, and she realized that he was actually like insulting the film and insulting me, and it just went right over my head, But so that's the first thing that comes to mind, is he found a way to compliment me that was really just like, I think you did a great job of showing, of making the family feel better about their perspective or something, and I was like, great, thanks, that's what we set out to do, but he didn't mean it as a compliment.
And I wonder if you can just, talk to me on a filmmaking craft level about what it was like, seeing these people. A lot of these people have told their stories before, many times. But what was that like?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And well, from a craft point of view, we shot a ton. We did really long interviews. That's what I always do, is like marathon interviews. With Danny, we interviewed her for 2 days. And anytime she's not on screen, we're frankenbiting the hell out of it. Because the problem with Danny, really the problem with Danny is that she's so close to this material, and she had been waiting for an opportunity to, get some of this stuff out. Like I said about that moment where you're reading the 3,500 pages and going, I can't believe that nobody's reported on this. She had been living with that feeling for, 6 years. So you end up getting into some real arcane, stuff that isn't good. It's not good cinema. So you have to really edit it down. And the only other thing I can say about the craft of it is they are deeply private, and they didn't want, you expect that a family who's had a tragedy like this is gonna have a hard time talking about the tragic part of it. But they also had a hard time talking about their positive feelings about Pat, because they just didn't want it. They had seen it cheapened so many times that they didn't, so time and time and again I would say, like to Marie, I'd say, so I understand Pat loved to read. And she just didn't even know, she didn't want to even go there, because, so what are you going to say about that? Like, yeah, he just loved, he was an avid reader, So there would be those kind of dud moments, where like the reason Kevin didn't want to talk to us, for instance, was he just said, what am I going to fucking do? Is just like sit there on camera and talk about how much I fucking love my brother? Like, no, I don't, it cheapens it, it cheapens it. He didn't want to, have it kind of spoon-fed back to him as a soundbite,
And I wonder what your experience of putting this story out there and having people respond to it says about that assumption that people don't want to talk about the war.
Yeah, listen, I'm not in distribution and marketing so much, but I think that all of those kind of, accepted pieces of wisdom are total BS. It's just, nobody knows nothing, I think. And, I'm not just saying it because Molly's here, but we did benefit from a team of financiers and executive producers who didn't buy into that, who just said, look, if you make a movie that's, well, actually now, as I'm saying, I'm realizing there were some really good movies about that didn't get the attention they deserved, but they just were willing to take a risk, and so hats off to Molly and the team at A&E and to the team at the Weinstein Company for believing in it.
We have, I think, a little bit of time to take some questions from the audience. Yes, you right there?
The question is, how do we really convince them? And it was not unlike what we did with Richard. We were just really pushy. And we just, my partner is British, so he has a kind of a charming, self-effacing accent. And he was able to, basically convince them. I mean, the thing is, we benefited from how much schlock was out there and how much schlock was coming down the pike, not just documentaries and cable stuff, but, Marie, we even filmed a scene that didn't make it into the film, but it was a comic relief scene where Marie is reading scripts that had been written on spec and put on her desk for approval, and they were like really funny scenes, like Pat's watching the Twin Towers fall and he throws all these chairs around the room and he gets on his Harley and drives off into the sunset. So we benefited from that, type of writing. And they realized, and were able to realize, especially with my partner's accent, that, either you let us do it or one of these horrible representations is going to happen. So that's how we convinced them.
Thank you very much for coming, and thanks especially to Amir Bar-Lev.